Welcome to Career Tools. This is Wendy.
And this is Amanda.
Today's cast, Brainstorming with a High C.
The questions this cast answers are: how do high Cs approach brainstorming? How do you manage a high C during brainstorming meetings? And as a high C, how do you best contribute to a brainstorming meeting?
If you want the answers to these questions and more, keep listening.
Before we get to it, did you know Manager Tools has an interview series designed to help you land your next big role? It's part of your Career Tools license, so become a Career Tools licensee today. Now, on to the show.
So this is the fourth in our series about brainstorming. So if you haven't heard it before, brainstorming is a technique that was invented in the 1930s. Probably people did it before that. When we called it brainstorming, that meant that we were able to make changes to this technique to make it better. And now brainstorming has a sort of set of rules that is used, and brainstorming is used in companies and teams all over the world all the time. There's probably 1 billion people brainstorming right now, but each person, each disc profile approaches it slightly differently. High Is love brainstorming because there's a whole bunch of people in the room listening to their ideas. High Cs would rather not participate. So if you're a high C and you're listening to this now, you're probably thinking brainstorming is the worst thing in the world. So if you're a facilitator and you have a group with a high C in it who is thinking this is the worst thing in the world, we're going to try and make it better for them, use their strengths. If you're a high C yourself, we're going to talk about how you can contribute to a brainstorming session and use your strengths and minimize the weaknesses that you have. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and most contribute your skills to the team.
What we're going to talk about today is first a quick introduction to DISC, then give the high Cs a heads up, next how to set and follow ground rules, then using the high Cs analysis skills, and lastly use the high Cs skills to build consensus.
So Amanda, for all the people who don't know what DISC is, let's give them a quick introduction to DISC.
All right, so DISC is a behavioral assessment tool that uses 2 axes to identify each person's preferred style of communication. First, you have the assertive and reserved hemispheres or axes, and then you have the task-focused and people-focused axes. Those who are assertive tend to speak loudly and quickly. They make large gestures, and they believe they can change the environment around them, which means when they walk into a room, they can put all the information out. They can use their ideas to influence others and to make a change within the room. They want all 100 people in the room to get on board with what they are talking about. Those are our assertive folks. Now, the reserved people, they tend to speak more cautiously, slowly, and quietly. They tend to make small gestures, meaning they kind of stay inside of their body space. And they believe that one person's needs does not outweigh the needs of the many. So when they walk into an environment, they tend to take information in. They want to make sure that they can gather information before they're going to put out ideas or try to influence others. So the high Ds and Is are assertive people, and the high S's and high Cs are reserved.
So on the other axis, there are the people who focus on the task to be done. So if they walk into a room, they'll say, what needs to be done? And they'll wait for you to give them the list of things, and then they'll check each one of those off in turn. The people-focused individuals ask, who is here? And they take time to connect before they do any of the work. They want to make sure that they are copacetic with all the people in the room before they all start work. The high Ds and Cs are task-focused, and the Is and S's are people-focused.
And when you put these 2 axes together, our high Ds are assertive and task-focused. Our high Is are assertive and people-focused. Our high S's are reserved and people-focused. And who we're talking about today, our high Cs are task-focused and reserved.
If you're wondering why we switched between DISC and MT DISC, and we sometimes say one and one the other, DISC is a sort of a technology, a psychological instrument that was invented in the 30s, and different companies have different implementations of it. Manager Tools has their own implementation of it, which we call MT DISC. You can take your profile on our website and find out what letter you are if you don't know. and also how to interact with other people. And then we have a whole bunch of podcasts on the website around how each profile approaches different situations and how to work better with different profiles, of which this cast is one of the series of the things that we have on the website. So there's a load of information. If you want to get more into DISC, I would recommend it, because I'd say it was the thing that changed my career, because I suddenly understood that people weren't just winding me up, which is what I thought all the high Cs were doing until this moment when I suddenly understood that they had an entirely different perspective on the world than I did. So the first thing, if we're doing a brainstorming, is to give the high Cs a heads up.
So first, tell the high Cs well before the meeting that you will be brainstorming. High Cs think before they speak. In fact, a high C would rather not speak at all until they have all the relevant data and they can be absolutely certain that they are correct. Again, they are the folks that walk into a room and they're going to take information in. They also invented email so they don't have to talk to you. So the idea of a brainstorm can be very stressful because it's a quick activity that they would rather sit back and process the information. And knowing that, asking a high C to, dare I say, guess what might be a correct solution to a problem not only makes them incredibly uncomfortable, but it's unproductive too, because they just won't do it. One of the things I say in some of our conferences when talking about the high Cs are, when you tell them 80% is okay, you can see all the high Cs cringe because they're not going to guess. They want all the information in order to be able to process it and give you something in return, because they value accuracy above all else.
So high C's ideas are well-formed and data-backed rather than the rapid-fire brainstorming contributions that D's and I's make. D's and I's just throw out ideas. A high C thinks about the idea and makes sure that it's viable, and they have all the data they need to make sure that they are saying something that is doable, that it's correct before they'll say anything. And that's a good thing because they are careful, and that means that they offer more reasonable, rational suggestions, which is a valuable contribution to the team. By building in time for high Cs to consider the problem ahead of time and giving them a heads up, that means the team gets the value of their strengths. And none of this is to say that high Cs are uncreative or don't come up with great ideas. Actually, Mike Ozan, who is one of Manager Tools' co-founders, is one of the most creative people I know. He's also a high C. And so he does go and gather a lot of information. He thinks more slowly than some of the rest of us. But when he comes up with something creative, it's like 3 steps past where I've even ever been thinking. Always. And I don't know how he does it, but clearly that information gathering thing works for him. So don't think that your high C is not going to come up with any information, any good ideas just because they think about it more slowly. They absolutely are.
They come up with the ideas and then they research it before they present it to you. So it seems slower, but they're just a lot more work on taking in all those factors. So know that if the problem hasn't been yet defined before you're brainstorming, you might need to have 2 meetings in order to get the most value out of your high C's contribution. So that means first, if your problem is not defined, you're going to schedule a meeting where the team only works on defining and understanding the problem. This gives the high C's and really the rest of the team time to consider what the problem truly is and how it should be framed. Then you hold a separate meeting to brainstorm the solutions for that specific problem. This allows the high C's to process and contribute at each stage rather than forcing them to shift the problem definition to the solution generation in one meeting. The time in between meetings gives them time to think about and develop their ideas. If you're asking them to shift from defining the problem to figuring out the solution, you're not going to get much for that second half, because even though you define the problem, now they have to go consider all the sides to it, because there's multiple sides, multiple things to consider with defining any solution. So that's why they're slower to move, and having 2 meetings can be very helpful.
We said this for the high S too, because they tend to think more slowly and like to consider lots of things. They're considering different things to the high C, but they do that consideration phase. If you have D's and I's, they'll say, why do we have to have 2 meetings about one topic? Because that will be annoying. It's not efficient. But what you have to tell the Ds is it's more efficient to make sure that we've defined the problem, got everybody's contribution, and then to think about the solution than just going off harebrained on the first idea that we have. And for high eyes, it's 2 meetings. Why wouldn't you want to go to 2 meetings? 2 lots of times to enjoy your tea.
I always feel like I'm interrupting, and I'm so sorry, but this one is worth it, folks. Pretty soon, Manager Tools will be in the Raleigh-Durham area, May 20th and 21st, with our Effective Manager and Effective Communicator conferences. You can attend either day individually or combine the two and save yourself some money. Pretty soon, Raleigh-Durham, Research Triangle Park, the Manager Tools team will be there. If you'd like to join us or just learn more, check us out online at manager-tools.com/register. Now back to the show.
Now let's talk about how to set and follow the ground rules. So conventional ground rules for brainstorming meetings include no interrupting, make sure all ideas are captured, and again, the infamous Manager Tools peanut butter rule, that there are no negative comments about others' ideas. Essentially, anything that gets said gets thrown on the paper. That's the Manager Tools peanut butter rule. If you want more insight into this rule, you can go to our Brainstorming podcast where we talk about it. But essentially, anything that gets said gets written down and you can discuss it later. So all ideas get written down. And as a facilitator, setting and enforcing these ground rules will mean that your high Cs have a chance to speak and be heard. High Cs will sometimes interrupt to correct someone else's mistake or misapprehension, but in general, they won't interrupt just to share their ideas. Again, they value accuracy above all else. So sometimes they'll kind of, I don't say chirp, but step in to say, oh, that's not correct. It's not really their ideas, but it's putting us back on the right path, because if they know that something's inaccurate, they'll jump in and say something. But as far as when it comes to sharing their ideas, they're going to sit back, I would say, hear all the other ideas and how their contributions could make a difference, or if we need to think of something else along with all those other ideas. But they will correct you, which can be very helpful to get people back on track. And on the other hand, they're not going to interrupt because it breaks the interrupting rule in a meeting, right? It breaks the rule of conversation. So high Cs are not going to break rules. They are rule followers, which is great when you give them ground rules.
And the other thing about high Cs and interrupting is they interrupt, they'll say one word, and then because they speak more slowly, there'll be a little space, and the high I can say 19 words in that little space. So if a high C says, hold on, by the time they've breathed and got ready to say the second word, the high I has already interrupted them and said a whole bunch of other words. So using ground rules means that you can ensure everybody is heard. As a facilitator, you can say, hold on, high I. The high C was still saying something. And as a high C facilitator, if you have agreed ground rules with everybody beforehand or at the beginning of the meeting, you can say, here's the rules. These are the ones we're abiding by. You agreed to it. You always, as a high C, you always know what the rules of any situation are, because that's kind of how you are. But other people, other profiles either don't know the rules or just completely ignore them. So having the ground rules agreed by the group means you can hold the group to them, and you can hold individuals in the group to them. It's not emotional. It's not personal. It's just like, here's the rules. We agreed to them. Wait your turn.
And the two most useful ground rules for high Cs are, first, the peanut butter rule. We're going to define it a little bit more right now. The rule is Manager Tools shorthand for no negative comments about other ideas. But really, the peanut butter rule says, if you say peanut butter, I'll write it down. It doesn't matter if the group or any of the other people in the group understand the relevance of peanut butter. The discussion of that can come later. But when the group is in the ideation phase, the object is to go fast and have energy. Stopping to ask how peanut butter is relevant is counterproductive to our goal.
And that's what high Cs will do. So you'll say peanut butter and they'll go, how's that relevant? Or peanut butter can't be used here because X, Y, and Z. They want to explain. And that's taking away the energy of the high Ds and high Is who are throwing out ideas. And it will also shut down the high S's who don't want to hear negative things. They want harmony, group harmony. So What comes across to other styles as criticism and what is actually high C is just asking questions for clarification or pointing out information because they think that it'll be helpful. In this situation isn't helpful. So stopping them doing that by having the peanut butter rule means that the whole group moves through that ideation phase and it's more productive.
The next rule is we don't have to be detailed, correct, or practical. As we said earlier, high Cs will interrupt other people to correct a mistake or a misapprehension. But like the negative comments, this slows down the idea generation for the group. For example, if someone suggests one solution is to create a new product category for the 2,000 products, a high C will want to be specific. Do you mean a new attribute on the current products or a new product? This isn't a negative comment, it's the high C's need for accuracy. They might also say, that can't be done without a code rewrite. Again, that's not the high C being negative, it's them giving more information about the practicality of the idea that they assume you don't have. And finally, they might say there aren't 2,000 products, there's 1,747. Again, it's not negativity, it's accuracy. To the high C, the exact number of products makes a difference to the solutions that they might suggest. So they're not trying to pick apart the ideas. They're just making sure that everyone has the relevant information to make decisions based on this idea, or that they have the relevant information. And that comes in terms of details. They are in the weeds with the details. So it might seem negative or disruptive to others, but that's the high C's way of just getting more information before they can move on. So having the rule during the brainstorm that we don't have to worry about those details, we don't have to worry about the practicality, can help the high C's move past that until you're at the next phase.
Because for the high I, the difference between attributes and products, or a code rewrite and no code rewrite, or 2,000 and 1,747 are all irrelevant. In fact, the difference between 2,000 and 1,747 doesn't even exist. And the high I might not get defeated in the face of being corrected by the high C, but the group may start to lose energy as a whole. Like the S will not like it because it lacks harmony. The D will not like it because it feels like being corrected all the time. And they just want to move fast. Like it doesn't matter why you're saying this. You're just holding us all up. So making this a space where we don't have to be right, we just have to have ideas, helps the whole group move through it. Like come up with ideas and keep the energy high. If we're clear that the time for specificity is after the brainstorming and that the team will absolutely do all of the research to make sure that the solution makes sense, should help the high C rein in their impulse to clarify, which is what other styles call correction. And if you're a high C yourself, remind you, keep this rule for yourself. Like if you're in a brainstorming meeting and nobody set the rule, just keep the rule for yourself. Like this isn't the time to make sure everything is correct. This is the time for ideas. Just going to let it go for now.
Now, how do we use the high C's analysis skills? Brainstorming consists of a series of stages described in many ways, but simply put, first you define the problem. Second, you suggest and capture ideas. Thirdly, you sort the ideas. Then you cull the ideas. And then you decide on the next actions. The sorting and culling of ideas is the part that you should ask your high C to lead. They have an innate ability to think about all the factors that are important in a solution and to create an analysis framework which will then assess them. So again, because they are so good at seeing all the factors, if you can have your high C facilitate the culling of ideas and deciding on what actions come next, they're going to be the ones in the best position to create the process for you or for the group, right? Because they will walk through all of those things in their brilliant minds to create a process to be able to say, this will work, this will not work, and know which factors contributed to that decision.
So if you're a facilitator, you can have this conversation ahead of time. So tell the high C you're giving them this task because you know they're good at it, and it'll help make sure that the meeting is successful. So for example, you would say, I need your help. You are so good at deciding how a situation should be analyzed and making sure the analysis is accurate and complete. Will you please help us by evaluating how the different suggestions can be converted into solutions? I'm really asking you specifically because your ability to analyze factors and identify what we should be measuring to find the solution is so good. We need your methodical approach to make sure we use the best overall solution.
All right. How can we use the high C's skills to build consensus? Perhaps surprisingly to some, the high C's have traits that make them skilled at building consensus around an idea. They excel at spotting patterns and combinations between different suggestions. While a high I might generate 10 separate ideas, a high C can often see how 3 of those ideas could be combined into a more comprehensive solution. Their ability to identify these connections help build consensus by showing team members how their different ideas can work together rather than compete. If anyone can pull apart all the factors of a bunch of different ideas and combine them to get everybody on board, because it's all supported by data, it's your high C's.
And the high C's also focus on facts, and they have this, what we call a flat affect, meaning their faces don't change that much when they're talking. They don't have a lot of emotion on their faces. If you look at a high I, all their emotions play across their face. A high C has a much calmer face for emotions. They're also diplomatic because they speak more slowly. They tend not to say the wrong words. It's I've said this before. My dad's a high C. He tells me, Wendy, think before you speak, or engage brain before opening mouth is how he puts it, which I don't do because I'm a high D. I just say things. And sometimes those things are stupid or they're the wrong thing to say in that situation because a high C thinks more slowly and thinks about what they're going to say first. They tend not to do that. They also tend to be, because they're fact-based, they tend to be less emotional. So instead of saying words which stir up other people, they tend to use the words that are just descriptive of a situation. And all of that can help when the D's and I's get passionate about some specific idea. And the D's and I's can work everybody up around a specific idea, whereas a high C can then help calm the group and then move them forward when they're stuck. They can say, okay, here's my analysis. We've got these 5 factors. This is what we need to do next. It's a very, because it's slow and methodical, it can calm the group down and then focus them on what they're supposed to be doing. So in that way, they are very good at consensus building, even though they're not the people-focused people. You would expect it to be the high S's who are so good at knowing what's going on with people, how they are emotionally and looking for harmony. But actually, they sometimes get caught up in other people's emotions, and they also can not want to say something that they think someone else will perceive as negative. And so the high C's, because they're based on fact, can actually be better at doing that than the high S's.
And they also have all the data to support the decision.
Yeah.
So it's supported by more information to help persuade people that that's the correct way to go and get everybody on board. Because it's not, again, not gut feelings. It's, I have more information to say this is why we should do this.
And it's not personal. It's just facts. That's why all the high C's say it's just feedback, because they think of machine feedback.
Yeah, it's just information. So managing a high C in a brainstorming session, even if that means managing yourself, means finding ways to use their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. No team of one style is effective, and high C's absolutely contribute to the success of brainstorming sessions. The task is to use their skills effectively.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Wendy.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next week with a new topic. Bye, everyone.
Bye.